Hello, everyone. This is Kripa Anand, and welcome to the Canadian SME Small Business Podcast. Today, we are diving into the plumbing of the Canadian economy. In 2026, cash flow remains the silent killer of small businesses. Yet, many owners are still using payment systems that haven't evolved in over a decade. Joining us today is Mark Loewen, president of Telpay. Mark is a respected fintech leader who has spearheaded Telpay's transition from a legacy pioneer into a modern online powerhouse. Since 1985, Telpay has moved billions for thousands of businesses, remaining independent and Winnipeg based in an industry dominated by global giants. Mark is here to share how a value led approach to payments can transform your business predictability. So, before further ado, let's welcome this special guest. Mark, welcome to the podcast. Such a pleasure to have you with us.
You, pleasure's all mine. I appreciate that intro. It's very very detailed. I know with Telpay in particular, having that 40-year history, there's a lot to draw on.
Definitely. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Now, Mark, you often say that, cash flow is the number one reason Canadian small businesses fail, right? And surprisingly, most of it is a solvable problem. So let's start by understanding from your perspective, what do small businesses misunderstand about cash flow and why exactly does it create that risk?
That's, a detailed question for sure. I would say, and this comes from my background. Before I ever started working at Telpay, I was, a serial entrepreneur. So I took a few shots on my own beforehand. And what I found interesting was, the products that you build, and I would, tend to kind of sit in this tech space, but I think it applies to every small business. The products that you build, whether it's, some type of software widget or, a baker who's making bread, right? What you get into business to build isn't the same as the operation of your organization. It's never the same thing, right? And so, you get into business as a baker to make bread and beautiful croissants, and what you find out is that you're up all night trying to make sure that the books reconcile, right? And there's this idea that that's something that you push to your bookkeeper, accountant, and they kind of handle the nitty gritty of it. But the reality of it is that the only person that understands your business is you, and the more that you get engaged in the actual business practice, the less you're really baking. You end up focusing more on making sure the dollars are coming in at the right time and going out at the right time. And the way we think about it at Telpay is that, and we talk about this concept a lot of money where you need it and when you need it. The speed that money moves through your business is what allows you to build in advance of, and small businesses are like this, but to build in advance of maybe what you can pay for from time to time. And that's the entrepreneurial disease sometimes that you're willing to do that. And so, for us, what we're hoping to enable businesses when we talk about the cash flow problem is to make sure that they've got an opportunity to see what's coming when they get it in the door, to be able to turn it around quickly, right? Because the longer it sits, and that's what we see is the biggest problem, and we talk about it in an economic scale across the country, is that when money moves, it moves slowly, and it's to the benefit of the people holding the money, not the people that are making the transactions. And those are the small business owners that we're here to empower. So cash flow is one of those things, dollars in and out. And it seems trivial when you get behind, the counter and start kneading the bread. But at the end of the day, that's what makes the business a business. So.
Wow, very well articulated. I think realizing that the speed of your payment system is, a survival metric, not just an admin task, completely changes how you view your daily operations. So thank you so much for those insights. Now, moving ahead, let's explore what a modern payment system should look like today, right? So from your extensive experience, right, why don't you paint a picture about what is an ideal situation? What is the most impactful change, according to you, that a business can make today to improve cash flow significantly?
I mean, there's a lot that you can do, I feel like, and it depends how formal you want to get your business. But I guess the one piece of advice I would have and I'm trying not to say it as if, in the ways that Telpay can help you. I'm trying to think about it in terms of the ways that it would have helped me before I ever had products like this is it is timing. Cash flow is about timing. And so when you look at speeding it up, you're also looking on occasions at delaying things. And
Mm-hmm.
I think when you run into that, like any small business owner would, right? You risk a relationship when you're slowing funds down on purpose. You risk a relationship, and the relationships are sometimes what gets you through the lean months, right? And
Yeah.
so, when I look at that, I think a product in that's sort of getting into Telpay's world, but having something at your fingertips that's going to help you get communication taken care of, so that you're talking with your suppliers, so that they're aware of the holdbacks, that you're trying to get into, that you've got an accountant that's able to reconcile. It's the communication of those aspects. Instead, as you scale, when it's not just you running the AP, you've got somebody else in there making
Yeah.
sure they're, delivering the holdbacks that you want. For me, that's really the key when it comes to the business success. It's moving the money quickly, but it's having that level of communication and accountability through your team of what's taking place, right? And that, from the perspective that again, when you get into, especially if you're in a capital intensive industry like construction, it's the timing that makes the money, that makes the business possible more than it is the raw dollars at the end of the day. So yeah, that timing thing we talk about a lot, obviously, it's
Yeah.
the thing when we talk about the value, kind of the value led product component that we have here, what we're trying to do for customers. It's about keeping things quick, and it's about getting data and moving, without any extra interference. And I think, any business owner that I've ever spoken to, and you ask, what's keeping you up at night, they'll give you a story, and and it'll be totally right. And they'll talk about it. What they're really talking about is, the hours in the day. I don't have enough time to get data to people, and I don't have enough time, to make my systems work in an efficient way. I'm out of time because I'm trying to bake. I'm trying to bake the bread at the end of
Right.
the day, right? So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would be if I had a piece of advice, that's where I would go. Try to
That.
find something that feels natural, that's easy for you, and and serves you at the end of the day, because hey, at the end of the day, you got to sleep. That's what we're worried about, right? Yeah. So that's where I'd go.
That is indeed a golden advice, because it is
Yeah.
straight from the heart, right? And it
Yeah.
comes from
Yeah.
all the experience that you've had so far.
Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah.
Now, also, I'd like to, touch on how independence shapes a value-driven payment approach, right? So when we
Mm-hmm.
talk about Telpay, how does a value-led independent company benefits small business customers, right? Majority of our listeners. So please use this opportunity to educate them.
For sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. I mean, if we look back at Telpay's history, you kind of mentioned, well, you did mention there's 40 years sitting there. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we were founded in 1985 in Winnipeg by, effectively, a small subsidiary of another payments-based organization. It was built around payroll at the time. And, and here we are 40 years later. I had the opportunity to sit and obviously in our industry, there's a ton of regulation, even though we're not quite a Schedule I banking institution. There's a ton of regulation, ton of legal requirements we got to go through. And I was in a meeting with the Bank of Canada a couple months ago, and they called Telpay Canada's first fintech, which I thought was an incredible badge of honor. At the same time that as a tech company, it was somewhat insulting. It was kind of, is a little bit of both sides. But
Mm-hmm.
I think, what it pointed to for me is that there's 40 years of doing it right that exists here. We've never had an issue with the banking partner. We've never had an issue, in terms of a Bank of Canada issue, CDIC issue. We've never had those problems. And I think that speaks to what our values are day to day, right? And we talk about this. I feel super fortunate to talk about this with our owners and the business at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
and let them know that, there's three asks we get from our owners. Can you build a thriving business? Can you build a thriving business that's, capable of sustaining more and more employees in Winnipeg specifically,
Mm-hmm.
understanding that we don't necessarily get great head office representation outside of the major urban centers. And can you do all those things and find a way to make an impact on the community, right? And so that's our goal. And I think independence is what gives us that. It gives us the opportunity to look at, top line objectives, but not have to manage for bottom line outputs in the same
Yeah.
way that you might when you have tighter operations, trying to squeeze bottom line outputs out of you. And I think for me, what a way what a way to build a business, right? And to operate a business, to take those three things and make sure that it's not just about the organization's success, but it's about the organization's success in a broader sense, with other factors, right? So, we talk about that a lot. The independence part plays in there when we talk
Mm-hmm.
about the value component, and we can add it in a few places. Again, you would have heard me say that our owners want to see value in the community as well as the organization, but then it gives us this incredible opportunity to bring that to the products we build, and to say to the development teams and the product managers, we want you to build things, but we want you to ship things for customers that are outcome driven, not output driven, right? We're not looking to
Mm-hmm.
squeeze it. We're looking to make it better. And I think when you talk about, the plumbing of a business, moving money is the plumbing. It's a utility. That's it at the end of the day. But that communication aspect, the reconciliation aspect, those are the value adds. That's the workflow efficiency. That's the stuff that gets you sleeping at night,
Mm-hmm.
keeps the heartburn down, when the cash flow conversations are a little bit stressful,
Yeah.
and they do get that way. And so, independence for us is everything. I think it's and it's what's allowed us to be the business that we are 40 years later, and still growing, and still building value for folks. I think
Mm-hmm.
that the one other thing that I offer on that is that for independence, when we talk about this regulatory framework with the Bank of Canada, when we talk about our history, what we're finding is we're going through these processes. When we sit down with the Bank of Canada and talk about their RPAA and fintech legislation creation, they're building it around what we've done well for the last 40 years, right? Which is to protect customer funds first and deliver them at speed without any reconciliation issues. In those trust management processes, those, we take care of, 14,000 businesses annually here, and we do that because we do the things right. And what's allowed
Mm-hmm.
us to do that is having the independence from a banking institution looking for a different outcome, or a different, an output on the P&L or on the income
Mm-hmm.
statement, whereas we're managing for long-term success.
Wow. Firstly, a huge congratulations for everything that you've achieved so far, and standing so strong
Well,
and
thank you.
building and building on what you said, Mark, has a special message for all of our listeners, specifically for all the entrepreneurs watching. In 2026, who you do business with matters as much as what they sell. While big banks and VC banked fintechs answer to shareholders, Telpay answers to you. They process $28 billion dollars a year because they prioritize your cash flow over their own quarterly hype. If you feel like your bank is holding your money hostage, and or your current system is just too fragmented, it's time to look at a partner that has been keeping money moving since 1985. Visit telpay.ca to see how the Telpayers can help you turn your payments into predictable timing. Support the independent innovators who actually understand the Canadian landscape. Now, coming back to you, Mark, choosing a provider that values long term stability over short term exits, it ensures that your business infrastructure won't just disappear overnight or change overnight, and that is very reassuring. So thank you so much for that. Now, moving ahead, let's explore building a strong service focused team culture. When we talk about culture or people, everyone has a different definition of what a culture means. From your perspective, how does your team culture influence the reliability of your payment solutions?
I mean, a great question.
Mhm.
I'll kind of I'll talk about maybe leading back to those kind of independent values based objectives that we get, right? I mean, you know, when you come to work, I believe this anyway, and maybe not everybody does. When you come to work, I think what most people are looking for on a day is, a place where they can get some type of, ability to make a few decisions,
Mhm.
that they can own. They're not, so, they're not micromanaged, right? Nobody likes that. They want to come to a place where they can see some humanity in what they're doing day to day. And, obviously they want to be compensated fairly. But what I found about compensation is if you can mix in all of the intangibles along with it, including culture, that compensation is not always the driving factor. Building the culture is what seems to keep people intrinsically motivated. And at the end of the day, that intrinsic motivation, you're always going to be working harder when you believe in what you're doing, right? So we try to build that culture. I'd say it's the most important part of our recruiting, when it comes to getting talent in the door. And we lead with those values. We talk about our mission, vision, values. We talk about reducing friction in payments regularly. That's our main objective. It's about creating flow so that we can keep that time loop moving faster and faster for small businesses. And I think, the culture that kind of perpetuates is where I really, I really see, values, on behalf of the organization, which is that it's a team culture, right? I mean, there's 40 years of history. There's 87 folks that work here. And we talk about our objectives being, how is it that we can get to 120? What's the step that we need to take to get there? And I think with that, you get buy-in, and that intrinsic motivation from the folks. We would use a term from soup to nuts, from everybody from customer service to the senior executive. And I think perpetuating that, the Telpay culture is talking about is as if we're a unit, we're teammates. When things are going wrong, we've got cross-functional calls that we can make, and making sure that the teams are integrated with one another. I think those are the most important things in terms of looking at success. And the next part about it is making sure objectives are clear. And when you have a group of people working towards a clear objective, they're able to work objectively as a team. And that's what you want. That's what you want at the end of the day. And, then the relationships become the intrinsic motivator as much as what we're doing today, right? Yeah.
Definitely. I think people are any organization's biggest asset, right? And when your team feels a sense of purpose in protecting a client's cash flow, that precision translates directly into the reliability of the platform. 100%. That's great. Now, Mark, let's do a little time travel. Say I were to give you a time machine and, we were to go 5 or 10 years into the future. When you get out of that time machine, what one change would you hope to see in the Canadian payment systems for small businesses?
I mean, the hope that I have been personally, looking for the last decade that I've been in this industry is speed. It's instant payments, and I think we're finally on the cusp of there being a legal requirement of that, across the industry, which I think is terrific. When we look at, and not to get into the competitive landscape, but, our objective has always been funds next day. If you're scheduling a payment for tomorrow, it lands at 9 a.m. And it would be to our benefit monetarily to delay that, right, in the Canadian payments ecosystem. We've always advocated that they need to be instant. We need to close that loop faster. And if we think about a relationship where I'm a baker and you're my flour supplier, the faster I can get you paid, the more flour you can get to me, the more bread I can make, right? And so it becomes a self-fulfilling loop, in my opinion. The more we put friction in there, the more we slow it down, the more that impacts the entire cycle. And that, take that on a broader scale, right? That's, we're looking at the economy as a whole. The faster we can get these money, these dollars into folks' pockets so that they can, get it to their employees, so that they can get it to their suppliers. The faster we can get people paid across the whole landscape means there's more dollars moving all the time. I mean, that's the key. And so, 5 years down the road, and I think I know it'll be sooner than that because we're already working on it. We're trying to figure out, what a world looks like where, we really take cash out of the conversation. All of mine and yours relationship when I'm a baker and you're that flour supplier is done electronically. It's done in real time. You're paid in the same, you're paid the same time that I receive the thing, the items, and we don't need to add that friction of timing that slows you down and makes me, gives me heartburn or stops me from sleeping at night. Right. And we can keep those things moving. So that's one of them. I would say the second thing that I'm excited to see 10 years down the road is, a world in fintech, specifically in Canada. And I think we're certainly moving there where, we have a common understanding, and this is getting a little industry specific, but we have a common understanding that businesses like ours, that sit in this independent framework are, equally as important to those that are entrenched as incumbents, in Schedule I institutions, that every dollar that we move supports those, every dollar that they move supports ours. And, what we commonly find is that we find friction in competition there in the conversation. I don't think that's the case. The objective here is to get businesses what they need when they need it, right? And it's a logistics conversation. When you talk about those other organizations, they've got different objectives built around lending, whatever they are, right? And so, just understanding that, this idea that the competition between incumbents and fintech new players is that one of risk. It's not. We're serving two different people. We're serving two different objectives.
Right.
And yeah, I think over the course of the next 5-10 years, that would be those two things taking place would completely reposition I think value for Canadian businesses when they're working on their cash flow.
You've painted quite a picture there. The future definitely,
very utopian, I would say, but but ideal, for the
definitely,
so,
the future looks very promising, and as you said, Telpay is already doing things to overtake the global scenario as well, and hopefully wishing you all success for that. I love the clarity with which you talk, right? And I'm loving this conversation. Definitely, I'd love to invite you one more time where we could, get into deeper conversations, maybe an in-studio episode that we do the next. But for now, before we let you go, Mark, if there's one final piece of advice that you'd let our listeners live by, if you could whisper one thing into their ear about fixing their cash flow immediately, what would you say and why?
What would I say? I would say be deliberate. I think when I look back on where I would have been, 10 years ago in my own entrepreneurial venture, I would have said that getting people paid and getting things paid was an afterthought. I had done the deal, I had done the work, and now, I needed to write the check. And the more I look back on that, that was the primary, that was the main issue in the organizations that I started, right? Especially when you're in startup mode, especially when you're in small business mode. Is just moving that money, being deliberate. And so, I would kind of push that forward on anyone and say, when you're looking at your cash flow, when you're looking at your business, of course, think about the breads, that you're baking and the croissants that you're getting out the door, but think about the processes that are serving you at night, because those are the ones that keep you up, right? And it's funny, we talk about on the management team here, often, my desire to avoid sleepless nights and avoid heartburn, and those are how we measure success, if we can get out of those. So yeah, be deliberate, and if you're deliberate, I feel that the precision is going to take care of itself afterwards. So be deliberate about the process that you're putting in place, and what you'll find is, or at least what I found is, the more deliberate I am, the more precise I get, the more efficient I become. It ends up kind of backing itself, right?
That is also a great reminder that you should always demand more from your providers than, just keeping the lights on. Mark, it was such a pleasure having you on the podcast. Thank you so much for being here and doing this with us.
My absolute pleasure, and I'd love to come back. Thank you.
Of course. All right. That was Mark Loewen from Telpay, a masterclass in cash flow control, fintech independence, and why value-led businesses is the key to thriving in the Canadian market in 2026. To all the listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to the Canadian SME Small Business Podcast. Be sure to subscribe and visit CanadianSME.ca for more such resources. To learn more about how we are supporting the ecosystem, please visit the Canadian SME Small Business Foundation at smbfoundation.ca. And lastly, a very special thank you to our partners, UPS and ADP, our HR partner, for their ongoing commitment to empowering small businesses across Canada. I'll see you all in the next episode. Kripa Anand signing off.